Well, good afternoon. And today I want to do a little bit of a personal evaluation of my own situation as to motives and ethics and that kind of thing. Partly because other friends of mine have been doing it online, and some spiritual, religious aspects, questions have come up. Um, and so I sort of want to work this, when inside out. And that's a model baseball stadium. When you swing inside out, you're aiming for hitting the opposite field, hitting the opposite field wall. It's a baseball analogy, and I'm wearing a Yankee cap, not the Red Sox or Astros. But um, let's. I'm going to talk about a little bit about um, ethical issues that kind of comes up in I think the parable of the talents, which is in um, can't fall off. So I've got my beanie now. This is my beanie cap, which is in the Bible in chapters in Matthew in chapter 25, verses 14 to 30. And notice in this Bible, I like it's King James, but it has red print for Jesus' words, which I like to see. It just looks more interesting and feels more authoritative. But go on. There's another picture of it in my copy, and there's a picture of the verses in red print, and a couple of objects. You'll see to what I'm getting at from today's service, Epiphany service. Another from, and here's something I placed. This is kind of my train set. I placed some coins here, just raising the question of, do we need money? Do we need fiat money or reserve currencies? Um, to live in a civilization. And the question, a friend of mine's raised that question recently, and could you barter everything? Could you barter work? Um, here's a guy chopping or making something with his hands right there. These are toys in a train set, but you see examples of clothing and work and things that can be bartered, and transportation, coal, passenger cars, a real, driving car. Just these are toys, but they sort of illustrate the problem. And also, just a picture from Glendale, California, in February 2023, when I went to a pitch fest. I just mentioned that, and that's the baseball stadium. But let me just get on to what I'm concerned about. The first of these books, remember I said, came out in 1997 with the first printing, and then went POD in 2000. Took me 2.5 years to write, and starting in 1994, and was published first in the July of 2000, July of 1997, and that was about the time that the internet was starting to becoming a tool for quick self-publication, because you could post HTML files starting as soon as late 1996. You could post HTML files online, and search engines would pick them up and show them to the entire world. And it was amazingly effective. You didn't even have to pay to be searched, and people would find it. And I found out quickly in 98 and 99. And 98, I put those are my books, but in 98, I put my books online for free viewing, even though I was selling a reasonable number of copies, but I wanted as many people to see it as possible. So in 1999, I put a lot of it online, and with the concerns I had was the don't ask, don't tell policy for gays in the military, and how that tracked back to my own experience at William and Mary with privacy in the dorm, the screenplay short that we just went over recently. Um, and I also added a footnote file. I kept notes on as I found out more things that you could look up online. And, I did a lot of critical thinking here on issues, not only the gays in the military and how they're related to gay rights as they were then. We didn't have gay marriage yet. This was the late 90s. But free speech in general, free speech now being interpreted as whether you can have a right to put something out on the world where anyone could find it without a gatekeeper stopping it or some. That was new that you could do that and then use search engines to be found, even though you weren't a professional at something, even though it wasn't your career or your profession to be an expert on the subject, your views could become known, and that could be pretty effective. But it could also create conflicts within the workplace where you worked, which of course now we know that's a lot more common with social media. And there was also conflicts, so the increasing conflicts over dedication of people to wanting to raise families. We're starting to find out. I didn't cover gender ideologies. We know it then, today. That didn't start to get noticed at all until maybe 2013 or so. And it didn't really get noticed very much. I didn't notice it very much until after the pandemic. But the way I was working, you didn't have to log in. There were no charges. I didn't ask for donations. And that was partly, I had income from many, I had worked for 32 years in information technology, mostly mainframe, and retired formally at the end of 2001 from ING Reliostar. I got pretty good severance and really good pension plan compared to a lot of people, and good benefits, health benefits, and everything continued. So I was actually pretty stable. Came back, sort of reset my life, came back and stayed with Mother in 2003 after her heart attack in 2019, which had sort of threatened to cause a disruption to my situation, but we had depended on caregivers, and she got through that and she recovered. But I was concerned. I came back from Minnesota, and where I'd lived since 1997, and in 2003. And then, I just had odd jobs and substitute teaching and some other things for a while, but I didn't really do anything to prove I could earn my own way. I kind of was dependent on her and on the accumulated savings I had. Then when she passed away at the end of 2010, I did, inherit an estate, which included the house and the right to distribute a quarter of it to myself. I went over that in another video, December 22nd. But the problems, would be then I was sort of in a position to influence how people thought about a lot of things without having to be accountable to anyone, which isn't necessarily good. Normally you need to have some sort of measure of accountability, which is, well, money generally. Because if what you put up pays its own way, then, and people are buying it and paying for it, then you're not just influencing others because you're more fortunate and more better off than other people and luckier and don't have to charge anything. There was criticism of the way I was doing things because in theory, I could drive legitimate journalists out of their jobs. At least that was one theory then. And later on, with the idea of more recently of making a movie of this, there's this underlying problem. Independent filmmakers, now, when they really become very independent and do everything completely by themselves without the established system, they could be driving people out of work. And that's a controversy that's become very sensitive since this strike in Hollywood and so forth. So all of that was going on. I had flat sites under the name HP Pub or High Productivity Publishing with the book in 1997. In 1999, I went in and got the domain doaskdotell.com, which is now equated to doaskdotell.info. But it wasn't really making very much money. And then there were other entities that were trying to use that. There was a doaskdotell.org. I don't want to discuss what they do, but there was always the potential I was concerned about that you could be, someone could complain about if you were interfering with their business, if you didn't have a legitimate business that could pay its own way on its own. So that was something I started to become a little more concerned about. Maybe starting, I didn't really hear anything, but after I got the estate, maybe starting around 2015 or so, I started thinking about that a lot more than I had been thinking before. And also using my nickname, which is Bill, is John William Bushka. So John is, of course, a biblical name, the fourth gospel. And Bill is a secular name based on William from England. On my mother's side, my father's was also John Joseph Bushka. Joseph is also a biblical name. His family came from what is now the Czech Republic, and mother came mostly from Northern Ireland and a little bit of Scotland and England. So that's how my name, the nickname. But if you're using a lot of different names for the same thing on the internet, that might cause a lot of criticism or complaint from others if it's interfering with them. And there were I never got served any formal letter about this, but there were some oral complaints I was starting to get. Also that, just wasn't fair if I had inheritance and generational wealth and others didn't, that I would be able to have more influence unless I proved I could have worked for it and could have earned it myself. So that was sort of the argument. So what I decided to do was that at the start of 2022, I would stop using Blogger, which I used for 16 years. It was very effective, discussing a lot of free speech issues, censorship, Section 230 particularly issues, FOSTA, SESTA, which Section 230 was compromised by the sex trafficking concern law in 2018. I talked a lot about that. And the general idea of the speech being done this way. And then social media, instead of search engines, we started having the idea of the idea of social media algorithms and popularity taking over. Gradually, video became more important than text, starting probably after 2008. By 2011, 2012, YouTube was starting to become something people could make money with. And then smartphones in maybe 2012, 2013, smartphones, got enormously more powerful than they had been. And kids started using them. They started having an influence on making how kids understood the world. It made them more vulnerable to believing certain kinds of ideologies that aren't maybe as based on objective facts. And the gender ideology problem started creeping up. I wasn't very aware of it until probably 2021, 2022. I always thought of trans as something adults do, and they transition, and then it's fine. You just live, I'll accept that you are what you claim you are. But when a minor can claim that, and with no validation of anything, that's a problem. I don't want to get into too much, but I talked about that before here. But I was very concerned when I realized the implications, the puberty blockers for minors and everything. And I had added beneficiary, at least one, to my to my estate that was involved in that. And so I was getting very concerned about the moral and possibly legal liability or legal implications of it. And so what really I had to be concerned about was how would I play ball, with the system. The other thing that's really, really important is that I wanted to be a public person, but you sort of have to be a local person first, have a family, have real responsibilities, have skin in the game, as Talib calls it. And if when you're a local person, you care about people and provide for people around you, and your policy views are more geared to what will be best for them. That's more legitimate self-interest if you have other people who depend on you. And the most natural way to do that is to have a family, a heterosexual family, and have your own children and raise them in a normal, even before 2015. And not everyone is inclined to do that, and I wasn't. But that's the most natural way to get the power and agency and skin in the game, literally, is to have your own and raise your own children and accept that's the risk you take. And then the less able people in the world, we all are not born equally gifted. We all know that, and equally able to perform for all kinds of reasons, including equally able to perform within the expectations of our biological sex, genetics, chromosomes, illnesses, accidents, and then war and misfortune and upbringing, all kinds of reasons. Some of us don't perform as well as others do, and I didn't. If you want to be a public person, but if something catastrophic happens to our whole world, it wouldn't have to be nuclear war. It could be like an electromagnetic pulse attack from an enemy, which I think is a much more dangerous threat than nuclear war in terms of how it could happen. If you stop and think about it, you could have to prove you could survive on your own without electricity for maybe many years, maybe be able to live in an abandoned house or something, be able to squat and survive and raise a family. And then someday, a couple generations from you, maybe things get back more to what they were. Or maybe someday something happens to this planet and we have to evacuate the planet and go somewhere else, go to Proxima B or go to and settle or live inside an O'Neill cylinder or something. I know people have theories about that. I won't get into flat Earth and everything, but I let me live in a simulation. That's more it. But so that raises the question anyway. If you want to be public, how do you play ball with the system? Well, one of the most obvious ways is, and Talib says this in his 2018 book, Skin in the Game, you must start a business, and then that means you promote somebody else's brand. Particularly what if you purchase a franchise? I think Tim Pool is going to be, selling a franchise, a coffee franchise pretty soon, or he's announced it, and it would cost a little under $1 million maybe to get set up in it. Theoretically, I could probably legally do that with the estate, but then I would be known for that franchise and not for what I have to say personally. I'd be limited by promoting that franchise or that brand and speaking for that brand. The same thing is true if you do multi-level marketing, which used to be very popular. It's been very popular for many years. Some people, it's kind of a Ponzi scheme, but some people will get very good at it. But then you're known by the Amway brand or whatever it is, they're selling whatever. And my father was a salesman. He sold glassware to manufacturers, and he didn't really have to sell to individual people. So he really lived an appropriately local but somewhat public life in the 50s and 60s when I was growing up that was possible at the time, and he was very effective with it. But that was what was possible then. So the world isn't quite the same as it is now. But I've been approached about a lot of things, becoming a life insurance agent. Well, that's because I worked for Uslico and Reliance Star, which became ING, and now Voya for 12 years, the last 12 years of my IT career. Well, can I sell what supported me? That's a good question. Always wondered. I was approached by New York Life and by one other Humana, I think it was, in 2005. And I actually interviewed New York Life a little bit, but I didn't want to wind up calling people. Or there was another company that was selling the idea of converting whole life to term, which was I looked at in 2003 when I was still in Minnesota. But I don't want to spend my life calling people and pitching things to them. But if you play ball with the system, everybody understands that most people have to hucksterize. So you take phone calls, and you also, if you play ball with the system, you join up with charities, you give money, and you help charities raise money, established nonprofits raise money. You may not agree with them on everything, like in the gay rights area. Now trans has gotten combined with it, and there are serious moral questions with inviting women's spaces, and particularly with minors. There are serious questions about getting involved in that. And I don't want to be involved with that, but I was, I inherited some of this. Do I really have the right to have my own opinions and insist on they be my opinions and be public about it and walk away from maybe people I've been connected to just because our society is changing so much and maybe becoming a little bit unhinged? Because I think with the internet, particularly with smartphones, I think a lot of people are losing the capability to take care of themselves. The highest IQ people are doing extremely well, but when you get below about the top 10%, 15% or so in the IQ area of people, young men particularly, young men are really having a hard time when they're not in that top tier of people, in terms of just intellectual ability to learn how to do things for themselves. If you can do things for yourselves and you can start businesses and help other people, then maybe it's okay, but not that many. It seems like a lot of young men today just aren't able to do that the way they were. I've looked at other things, being a tax preparer, the substitute teaching I was sort of undermined by the fact I've never had a family myself. But there was an incident in 2005 that had to do with something I posted, a screenplay I posted called The Sub, about a substitute teacher getting into legal trouble. But then, the whole question of self-libel, that I was too much like that character, even though it was fiction, it caused a major incident when I was substitute teaching. That's a whole nother story and a whole nother mystery that would make a movie itself. I could have been a mail carrier at one point. Another thing about, if you're going to sell these things, if you're going to if you're going to say own a franchise and represent a coffee franchise or McDonald's or anything, food, anything, any kind of franchise, you have to be able to do the work yourself. Can you stand on your feet and work in a McDonald's for 12 hours and do the manual labor? A person working at McDonald's takes orders and does the credit card processing from another car going by at the same time. It's very tiring work to do a whole shift of that nonstop. Could I do that? Am I confident enough as a person to do the manual labor? There was a value. My father used to say, that manual labor was an important virtue, and we understood that more in the past than we do now. My father also used to say to obey is better than to sacrifice, which is sort of religious idea that if you live in a way that takes advantage of other people's labor, and it sounds a little bit like Maoism, communism or something, if it's extreme enough. But if you live in a way that takes undue advantage of others, and then you contribute to other people's grievances, and then somebody comes after you, you're done. You're not going to get it back. And if you don't play, that's part of the whole spiritual thing, I think, of what happens in your afterlife. If you cheated your way, if you didn't actually earn your place and it's taken away from you, no, even by war or somebody else's wrongdoing, you don't get to go on to a reward. You have to, there's sort of this idea of join or die. That was the name of a film recently, that you have to be willing to join with others first at some level of intimacy and help share their causes, even if you don't agree with all of them, before you have a right to be heard for yourself. That's another idea that's actually out there floating around. At the other extreme is, of course, the far left, that everything is about oppressor versus oppressed, and that you should not feel ashamed to consider yourself a member of an oppressed group. That's why, they insist that gay men remain allies of trans people, when obviously the needs are very, very different. Feel like gay men felt like we were home free after 2015, after ending Don't Ask, Don't Tell in 2011, and then gay marriage in 2015. But then all of a sudden, this is coming back. That some of the more subtle problems that we weren't doing, we weren't contributing to supporting families. We were going off and living lives on our own, when in the past we would have been expected to stay home and support family. That whole idea, which is in my short screenplay, the expulsion, started coming back to haunt us. And we weren't as free of that as I thought. It's been a real shock the last 2 or 3 years. I think there's this whole idea that the way to have freedom is you have to be willing to let others be close to you. If you want to be close to people that are better than you, you have to be willing to let others approach you and join with you, or you have to be willing to join with them, in order to have integrity with the freedom that you have. And for liberalism, as we understand it, to continue working, you have to, and not just simply be a matter of what group is the most marginalized or who belongs to what group and how you define that. If you want to, you have to offer something yourself in a way of openness to other people. Civilization might be able to make it with an authoritarian makeup, and where it just gets rid of people or forces them back to being cared for in their own families, and with no common, benefits for oppressed. It could make it that way, and maybe other civilizations do that. That might be how it would be if we had to move to another planet on an O'Neill cylinder or something. That's something I've thought about. So those are kind of the ideas I wanted to just share with you today, and they're very important to me. And I'll probably have to, just one other thing. Again, the whole idea of taking on a gender identity, I don't think I said that in the last video. A lot of that is because some kids know they won't do very well having to compete with others with their same biological sex. So if you can be identified as something else, that works to your advantage. That's just as naturally common sense. I could have been faced with that when I was growing up, and fortunately, it didn't go that way. But so I turned out much better than I might have. But that's what I have today, and may come back to this topic again soon. But I do thank you for listening to this important topic.